Call the work session to order. Day by day. So the first item is transportation and mobility plan phase 3 kickoff, drastic success measures and alternatives. Before we go to Troy's presentation, I'd like to have a little bit of a process discussion with council. So we've received we have a couple things going on. So we have a very detailed plan. Troy has about a 30-minute presentation. I think the intent is to have a conversation among council, talk about sort of general direction. We've received a lot of feedback on the Butte Bridge. And I think one of the things that the council will want to provide feedback tonight on is what items we want to take on, items we want to consider. And my suggestion would be, given the intense public interest in the Butte Bridge, that we have a discussion about whether the council wants to take it off the list or consider it. And then if we do want to consider it, we have a work session with public input dedicated solely to the Butte Bridge, just because of the amount of interest. I don't know how many action items you have in the transportation plan, but I think it's somewhere between 50 and 100. And so if we end up talking only about the Butte Bridge, which I think if we want to consider it, the topic in and of itself, we'll lose track of the whole, the rest of the plan. So we will have public hearing after the work session. So there's public comment. People can provide comment on anything. But anyway, I just want to throw, before we launch into Troy's presentation, what do people think of that idea of either having a discussion about whether we want to consider it? And if we decide we want to consider it, having a work session with public comment dedicated solely to the Butte Bridge.
How about a work session dedicated solely to the bridge so that we can hear everything everybody has to say instead of trying to
do it all tonight?
Right.
Now maybe like a 30 minutes so that we can.
Well, what I'm suggesting is we go through the presentation and then we get a straw poll and see whether there's enough support of council to consider it. And if so, then we schedule a work session with public comment dedicated solely to that. And I'm guessing it's not going to be just a half-hour work session. Because we've received about 43 comments. Giving each person 2 minutes is an hour and a half.
But if I understand you right, you're saying first, we just sort of see if there's enough will on our part to even keep
up. That's right. And so essentially what I'm saying is we slow down any discussion of the Butte Bridge. And if we decide after tonight's work session that it's on the table and we want to explore it, we have a session dedicated solely to that.
And Troy, I know you're waiting. Are you still waiting for engineering to come back? That's kind of part of the discussion. I mean, it may be.
Yeah, we're waiting for the engineering. We're confident in stability. It's really the railings that needs to get modified.
So it could be that.
It sounds like it's not.
So what we're going to do is we're going to have Troy's presentation, which is going to go about half an hour. It is a work session. And so then we're going to have reaction to Troy's presentation and questions. At the end of it, we'll take a straw poll on the Butte Bridge. And if we decide there's sufficient interest to explore it, then we will schedule a work session with dedicated public comment for that. There will be public comment scheduled at 7:03. So regardless of what we do or don't do in the work session, people are more than welcome to provide public comment during that public comment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy. And you've got about a 30-minute presentation. Is that right?
Mark, yes.
Go.
The goal is, Mayor, to understand the goal tonight is we've worked a long time since January and get your feedback, any concerns and priorities the mayor said, and just confirm a general strategy. That's really the goal, which outlines the success measures. So let's real quickly talk about the plan and where it came from. This came from the Compass, the community's comprehensive plan, and strategic goal number 5 said de-emphasize cars and focus on walking, biking, and transit. That was affirmed by council at the start of this. It wasn't just in the Compass. It was affirmed again, but yes, you agree that that is the challenge of the transportation mobility study. The staff is now executing an investigation. We started in January with detailed data analysis Introductory webinars, they're still on the town's website to sort of explain all aspects of transportation from a national perspective. And we held a council study session where you affirmed the goal. From May to July, we actually then took that data and took it out to the public and heard their concerns. We had a number of focus area workshops. We had our think tank campaign. Thank you, CV News, for partnering with us on the CV newspaper survey that came out. And now we're just beginning to draft the plan. So nothing is set. We know the data, we know the community's feedback. We've collectively created draft success measures and initial projects that feed those success measures. We have a steering committee that is going to advise staff as we put it together, take all the public comment and work with council to draft a plan by November. Similar format as we did in Compass with the advisory committee and council sort of collaboratively creating the plan. So let's get right into the success measures. This is the full spectrum of transportation options available to the town, right? You can focus on moving cars. You do that through more pavement or more efficiency. More pavement is obvious, more efficiency is roundabouts, doing other things to squeeze more capacity out of what we have, one-way streets, etc. You can move more people, right? Through transit, bicycling, micromobility, and oddly enough, parking management. You can actually ship people out through parking management into transit. You can improve the quality of the trip that we heard from a number of folks through context-sensitive design. That's designing, working with CDOT, making sure 6th Street matches Crested Butte. Users view and comfort. Do we have low floor access buses? Do we have a scenic route? Is it landscaped? What are we doing to improve the quality and comfort? Do you deal with ice or not? Townwide traffic calming is a way to improve the quality of the trip. And obviously personal security and safety walking at night is concerns in many cities, but this is within the spectrum that we can choose from. Next is land use and road network. Move fewer people, fewer miles, right? You do that through network improvements. You do that through pedestrian oriented environment, playing with the parking ratios and dealing with mix of uses, right? A lot of that will come in an infill study, but land use is probably the most powerful tool. Putting Mineral Point in town reduces vehicle miles of travel better than anything else we could do because the people who live there were likely working here and they can walk and bike. And that's land use is the most powerful tool. And then lastly, recognize you can manage, not solve. You don't really solve transportation, you can manage it. You can do it through lane limits. Many states have said no more vehicle lanes. We're only investing in transit after a certain lane capacity, or you could change your standards. Roadway engineers grade roads from A to F. And when you grade it from A to F, there's a 20% capacity with each. So a lot of rural areas use level of service D from a traffic engineering perspective. You can change that through a stroke of a pen, council, to level of service E, adding 20% capacity. You're getting congestion with that. But through a stroke of a pen, you can change expectations. So roads don't break like bridges, right? If you have congestion, people decide a different time of day to travel. They'll decide a different route to travel, or they'll decide a different mode of travel, right? So transportation is not structural engineering. There's capacity and people have choices once congestion exists. So that's why we can change standards. So from knowing all the options and all the data, staff worked with the community and came up with these 8, what we call success measures. And I'm going to go through each of the success measures and projects that are associated with it. But these came from the community and looking at the metrics of what makes most of implementing the goal. So what those success measures really do in the full spectrum of transportation options available to us is really more pavement is not an option. We're not going to widen 6th Street. It is not an option considered in the town of Crested Butte. We're not making the roads faster, we're making them more efficient. So you'll see alternatives that really focus on the efficiency and safety of the corridor. And some of these efficiency work better than what we have, so it would put more throughput in the town, but it's doing it in a very safe way. It's not making more cars through town, it's making them more efficient. We are going to see strategies about moving people in this serious, working with our partners at RTA and Mountain Express. Thank you guys for showing up. Working bicycling and walking, working with micromobility, and I'll explain that in a second, and really being serious about parking management. Improving the quality of the trip. We'll have different alternatives that deal with traffic calming and others I go through here. I just want to point out the land use changes. So you're going to see alternatives that do what we call flex the network or connect the network. And really Red Lady and the Butte Avenue bridges are the piece of that, they're underutilized network. And so how can we make it more efficient and more equally distributed in town? And then there's land use things I highlighted in green, mixture of commercial uses. Do we have commercial uses so you don't have to drive to Gunnison? Right, what are the commercial mix and what can we do from an incentive and land use perspective to keep people in town instead of leaving town? And then what can we do for deed restricted housing? That is what we call the infill study. The infill study's coming right after this plan in 2024. So we can really talk serious about land use. But again, that's going to be the most effective tool we have in dealing with transportation. So let's get right into it. What are the projects that we're talking about? The first is ensure the town remains a 15-mile-an-hour community. That's the goal that sort of staff and working with the community is maintain that, because we're doing it pretty well. And there's two projects that really do it, improve the gateways and implement traffic calming policy throughout the town. And the survey to the right is the newspaper survey. This is a great idea, was the predominant response to the Red Lady roundabout. So I'm going to walk through sort of alternative. What do I mean by gateways and townwide traffic calming? There's sort of three roundabouts. So below this map are the speeds in town. So we know exactly how fast people are going. We use cell phone technology to follow the phones, and we know if you're in a car or on a bike. And the issue are really the gateways. If you come in off of Kevlar down White Rock, you can see the distribution of speed. Once you get to first, it starts to spread out. The biggest culprits are really off of 6th. If I'm coming from Mount Crested Butte, if you get to Butte, you can see serious speeding coming off of Butte. At the 6th Street intersection, they work their way over to 7th and 5th.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
is this, can you make it any bigger?
I will try.
And I have a question about the little green spot at the end of the circle for the Red Lady roundabout.
Yes, I'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna try to make this as big on the screen as we can. So as you come into town to the north, you can see 24 miles an hour. That first block between 6th and 5th is the 85th percentile speed. So what you're seeing, the majority of town is traveling at these speeds. You see the Elk Avenue traffic calming is actually working. We're seeing traffic at 10, 9, and 11 miles an hour, which is fantastic. But at the gateways, once they come in off of Red Lady, or they come in off of Butte, or they come in off of First, they're distributing. So what this says is we're recommending traffic calming and gateways to intervene at the gates, to get the speed before it gets into town, and then use the traffic calming policy after. All of these technically work, and we can go into details of traffic calming. What's up the hill is working with the county. Because of the hill, we want to get them before they get to the hill. So we have to work with the county and CDOT and try to intervene up on the hill. And traffic calming is not changing a speed limit. Traffic calming is the geometric change to the street. CDOT will not use a stop sign to change speed limits. And most traffic engineers recommend strongly against that because it's the geometrics that dictate speed, not speed limits.
But Troy, before we go on, I know that the intersection of Fifth and Red Lady and the highway, it's not Fifth, the highway and Red Lady needs a lot of help.
Yep.
But the way you've positioned the other roundabouts is a little bit outside of town, like up on the
Yep.
hill. Is there a reason we wouldn't have a roundabout further up the hill?
We would do it, roundabouts need to go at intersections. So the next one would be at Slate River. And it's too far, so motorists,
There's a roundabout on your way into Telluride that isn't at an intersection at all.
right,
It slows you down.
right.
So.
Right, and then that's a really long distance to keep that speed. And so getting it at the intersection, you can traffic calm Pyramid, you can do others to help gateways, but that is a detail we certainly have to work with the county, both on Kevlar and Pyramid, and obviously working with the state down at Red Lake. Going back to the slideshow. What are some alternatives, right? It's not just a roundabout at Red Lady. We have 4 different alternatives. You look on the wall and we get through it. The roundabout is the safest intersection you can do. It does many, many things. It creates what we call deflected collisions, which almost no serious injuries with roundabouts. They take fatalities generally away. The alternative, we don't have to do a roundabout. We can do what we call a high T. And if you're in Buena Vista, coming from Denver, going to Salida, you know what a high T is. That's a signalized intersection. It's when you make a left and you accelerate to catch up to the lanes, but you're protected. So that certainly is an alternative. It really doesn't do gateway features like a roundabout. It doesn't slow traffic down like a roundabout. It handles the movement. That's the difference. So we have 4 alternatives for that. We can look at traffic calming, townwide. We looked at lowering the speed limit to 10 miles an hour. We need to change every street in town, either through aggressive traffic calming or physical curb changes to get it to 10 miles an hour. And that's such an astronomical cost. We're really not seeing speeding at 15 miles an hour. So we're rather working on reducing the number of trips in town, because we know 15% of the population is going to speed. So you can reduce the volume and reduce the number of speeders, or you can reduce the speed. We think reducing the speed is just simply too expensive to do it town-wide. We're going to do it at key intersections, but that's why we're doing it. And these are physical changes to the roadway that are possible, but we have to take snow into account, right? The flower boxes are great for snow because we can pick them up and move them out of the way during the snow. We don't have speeding in the winter. The next, so that's getting to 15 miles an hour. This is 6th Avenue corridor is safely manage congestion and provide alternatives to it. So when you think of the 6th Avenue corridor, we've done detailed engineering work. The left column is today's operations. You see the level of service in the letter, and then the colors orange or yellow show how far cars stack up 95% of the time. Not during 4th of July, 95% of the time. That's what traffic engineers do. So that's today's operation. The only problem we really have is the westbound left out of Red Lake. It's not getting into the school, it's getting out of the school. That's the problem. And so we have to address that. That's what the roundabout or the high T do at Red Lady. 2045, if we don't change anything and everything projects forward, you start to see level of service F come up. F, the road doesn't break, it just creates challenges. It starts to be backup. We do need congestion for transit to be successful. So what does congestion really mean from a life safety perspective, right? Congestion is our future. The question is, how do you manage it? So number 2 is there's significant consequences of congestion. And these are the crash types. 40% of all crash types are associated with frustrated drivers associated with congestion. Speeding, running red lights or stop signs, reckless driving, aggressive driving, those can all be tied to congestion. And so if we just accept congestion and say, we're not going to do anything to 6th, you are potentially making a very unsafe situation for pedestrians and motorists. Because if I'm a motorist and I get to the 4-way and I've waited 2 minutes to get there, and it's finally my turn to make the left-hand turn, I'm going to make it. And then there's going to be a pedestrian in my walkway. And I'm going to stop in the middle of the lane, graciously let the pedestrian yield or go ahead of me. But congestion, you can't just accept it and think you're going to have a safe environment. And also with congestion, we have to be intentional. Can our emergency vehicles actually get through it to serve our needs? And so those are things you have to think about when you accept congestion. So we've created a transportation plan for the 6th Street corridor, looking at all the 3-way intersections, 4-way intersections, looking at the 4-way, looking at Pyramid. This is a diagram of the 4-way. Today, we don't have a traffic problem at the 4-way. We have an uncomfort problem for pedestrians. Traffic isn't expected to trigger the failure of the 4-way until 2035. We can project out that's when it's going to happen, if nothing else changes. Everything changes in a town, so we can either accelerate the need for the roundabout or delay it by our actions. Roundabouts are safer for pedestrians, single lane roundabouts.
I'm sorry, can you
Yep.
clarify? We can delay or
Accelerate the need for the roundabout by our actions. And so right now, we believe the full package of recommendations, you won't need it in 2035. And we're saying reevaluate the need for it in 2035 because we believe the whole package eliminates the need for the roundabout at the 4-way. So these are just different diagrams, but I know even at Red Lady, pedestrians are going to be going through with the audience. There's 64 opportunities to hit a pedestrian if you're at an 4-way intersection. There's 8 opportunities to hit a pedestrian at a roundabout. There's one, when you're crossing one side of the street, there's 6 opportunities to get hit by a car with no refuge. In a roundabout, you have 2 opportunities to get hit by a car. And you have a pedestrian refuge, so you do 1 at a time. And the entering speed is at 15 miles an hour. Pedestrian roundabouts are significantly safer than signalized or 4-way intersections. So that leads to, we know with the roundabout and network and congestion, because we'd like to see Gothic as in its condition in Butte, we know traffic is going to utilize our network. And so at Red Lady and at Butte, we're recommending the Butte Avenue Bridge stay a yield lane bridge. Be a traffic calmed one-way bridge for directional traffic. And when the Red Lady roundabout or solution comes in, there's gonna be a lot of traffic that will no longer go backwards to the four-way to go south. They'll be able to go to Red Lady to go south. So we're gonna be adding trips to 7th and 8th. We're gonna be obviously adding trips to Butte. We know that, but we're going to be reducing trips on 1st, 2nd, Maroon, Elk, Butte, Teocalli, Gothic, all of those streets, you will see a reduction in traffic with that, with those two connections at Red Lady and Butte. We did a study. This number right here is the current traffic and pedestrians. Green is cars, blue are pedestrians, orange are bikes on Butte Avenue, west of the bridge. When you look at Maroon 1st or 2nd, there are far more pedestrians and bikes on Maroon 1st and 2nd than there are on our Butte. We've calculated how the traffic, if we opened it up, it would serve the neighborhood, it would serve Peanut Lake, and it would serve the western edge of Elk. So we've reallocated the traffic. We anticipate about 800 additional cars on Butte. It will still be one of the lowest volume streets in the city or in the town. These are the volumes on Maroon, volumes on 1st, and the volumes on 2nd. So we could show you town-wide where the volumes 800 now falls into the average of all the streets in town. Next is increased transit coverage and convenience. We would like to work with Jeremy and Scott through their strategic plans to improve the coverage in the town. Right now, Mountain Express serves 21% of our households and 42% of our commercial property within 500 feet of the stops. So these are 4 alternatives that expand the reach of transit, tweaking, adding stops so they're serving the 500-foot distance. And you can see the reach go from 21% to 53% using this alternative, or just making the loop 2-way and going down to Bellevue earlier than 4th. You get 31%. So we aren't recommending any one route in this. We're recommending you go to Mountain Express and through their strategic plan so we can evaluate the best way to improve service within the town. We're also going to be going to Mountain Express and RTA to expand the definition of transit. We're a really small town, and we can be really efficiently served by transit, but aren't we trying to reduce the number of cars? So what car share is, can we select car share and have Mountain Express and the town collaboratively work with a partner to maybe subsidize car share? So I can live in Crested Butte without a car. So you'd be able to rent this car, it'd be stared at the 4-way or at a high density Mineral Point place, that you can rent it because you don't need a car every day. So if you need to go to Gunnison or go to a faraway trail, it would be available for you to rent at a very discounted rate. It's much cheaper than owning a car. Could Mountain Express and their board work with the town to subsidize that? Because there's a direct nexus. If we eliminate, we can live in town without a car. There's clear transit ridership. So there's a clear nexus. Similarly, can we do bike share? Can we create a bike barn and electric bike share? So if I'm a CB South person, I can either store my bike indoors or I can rent an e-bike. Again, they could take RTA and then have access to the bike. So there's a direct transit nexus. So we really want to expand what we think transit is beyond fixed working our routes. On demand doesn't really work in Crested Butte. We're too small. They're going to try on demand in Mount Crested Butte. But these are different ideas. Again, seeding ideas for their strategic plan and their community outreach to work through. Next, manage parking in a way that driving isn't the first choice. Can we do a town-wide parking management plan? Not charged, but actually start to say who parks on our streets and how. There's many benefits to this, right? We need to look at the infill study. We have a lot of on-street capacity. Do we want to use that on-street capacity for additional development, for deed restricted housing and others, and play with the ratios and get on-street parking for that? I wanted to show this graphic. This is the 4-way in the winter, and it was during one of our bigger winters. 30%, 36% of all visitors to the 4-way are from the city of Gunnison, and they're going to ski. And we know the rest of Gunnison County, about 15% being Almont, Skyline, Riverbend, Buckhorn, they're parking here to ski. And then 5% are coming from Crested Butte South. Interestingly enough, 10% are from the town of CV. And so we have people driving over the four-way to catch the bus. And so that's why we want to tweak the coverage so we can capture them on bus. But then can we work with the region? We can't control this and maybe put a park and ride down in CV South. Park and ride at Brett Creek or down in the city of Gunnison so that they capture the origins of the trip. Park and ride should be located at the origin, not the destination. And then we can rethink how we do the four-way. The four-way could then be programmed to say 4-hour parking and all day for employees, do others so it's not becoming a ski resort parking area, but it's really a parking area that serves the town of Crested Butte. And so that's not going to be decided, the details. It's the concept that we need you to, we would work out the details. Next is invest in sidewalks. We have streets in here that living without sidewalks on don't make sense, right? Bellevue is sort of a leading candidate. It's a very confusing street. Parking is everywhere. It's commercial. Can we actually physically put a sidewalk in on that street? Can we do it on Third to connect to Big Mine? And then can we create pedestrian bridges over Coal Creek on Teocalli and Gothic to complement all the others? We want more pedestrians walking in town. We want to give more choices to pedestrian town. So we want to up the game so the pedestrians and bike can completely circulate through town with comfort. So that's in here. So what is a concept, right? This is Third, back in Angle Park, or back in our head-end parking right at the stash. It's not particularly pedestrian friendly. You can convert that to parallel, create 16-foot sidewalks. This is one of many different alternatives. In this case, you create 16, you make it a much more organized street, giving the sidewalk to retailers and pedestrians rather than 90-degree parking. There's a consequence to that. You lose 44 parking spaces, right? If you did this to Third. But de-emphasizing cars, nothing is more powerful than parking. How about prioritize pedestrians and residential streets? We're not going to put sidewalks everywhere. We can't afford that, and it fundamentally changes. So what we want to do is put sidewalks occasionally on our commercial streets like Sixth, Elk, and Bellevue. Can we keep our residential streets a shared street? How do you do that, right? You do that through townwide traffic calming, and we actually try to distribute traffic rather than concentrate. So our alleys right now serve the private property. That's their sole purpose, right? To drive there. We don't have all our driveways off of the alley. Over time, can we change our development regulations so every home that changes into the future puts their parking in the back, and we can recreate parallel parking on the front? So they can still park on the front. They're just parking parallel. Instead of people, this is White Rock, instead of backing out on the street, hitting a flower box, a bus, or a pedestrian, we'd rather have you on the alley. What that would do is the Kebler traffic, or if I want to go to the 100 block, I can use Kebler. I'm sorry, White Rock or Kebler. And if I live on a certain block, I would go to the alley to get to my home. So what you're doing is literally cutting the traffic in half. And so the local homes that are served by the alley would be getting there by the alley. Right now, our design guidelines encourage it, and we would want through the infill study to require it. And that will instantly lower the volume of traffic and consequently the number of speeders. If you immediately do that, because I know no one in this room speeds. That is sarcastic. I've done studies all over the country, and the biggest culprits tend to be the residents who are speeding on the streets. Next is elevate the pedestrian on Elk Avenue. So we had a long discussion on Elk Avenue, which this study would probably feed into a streetscape plan. What we heard is, can we formalize our parkings right now, make them ADA accessible, make them more durable, and make them more formal? Instead of changing the curb and making more sidewalk space, let's just be seasonal and use the parklets as shown in this diagram in Louisville. In the street itself, what do you do? What we heard is no major changes, right? They would certainly like to see the brick and the sidewalks level, so it can be all ADA accessible. And if we make that 16 feet wide of ADA accessibility, suddenly we can allow outdoor retailing on the sidewalk. We can allow A-frame signs. We're not constrained to a little 6-foot ADA accessible sidewalk. And that's why we're constraining it. We can open it up and have a lot more opportunities. You do that in the way that is a major streetscape. In white, we would do curb extensions. You saw the white hashings on the street. That's where the pedestrian can be most visible. You can do that through curbing, and we can do snow compatible curbing. It'd be flucked like the city of Denver. We could just use our flower boxes more aggressively on the corners, or we can do paint. I mean, probably all saw a big change in Oak Avenue this year. We put in the white hatched areas to make it more pedestrian friendly. So those are the list of projects that are associated with success measures. So what's next, right? We need council to help and the community to help identify the projects, organize them and prioritize them, right? So this is how we look at a general framing of priorities. We need to understand 6th Street and council's goals for that, because that sets the pattern in town. That says if we do something, we know if they're going to avoid congestion or if they're going to stay on 6th Street. Butte Avenue is directly tied to what we want to do with 6th Street. We know the school is expanding and we're working with them right now. The county just received a Safe Streets for All grant that makes us eligible for a lot of federal funds to make changes to the Red Lady or potentially the 4-way in the long term. Subsequent network connections are not. That is the Butte Avenue Bridge question. Townwide traffic calming and action is directly correlated to what we do to 6th Street. What we do to 6th Street directly correlates to our sidewalk plan. After 6th Street, which is the biggest domino to fall in what council's expectation is, parking management is next. Parking management controls the demand. If we say no parking in town, guess what? There's no cars in town. So I'm not saying that, but it is the most powerful tool to manage cars. After parking demand, then we need transit to serve the community and serve the growth in traffic. That's transit sort of falls third in the priorities of these things. Then come the regulatory changes, right? Do we change our parking ratio? Do we require alley use? What are the regulatory changes? What do we do in the infill study? And then lastly, the timing of these things. If we did anything to Elk or a major physical infrastructure, we'd want to certainly coordinate that with wastewater, water, and other infrastructure needs. So even though we may want Elk next year, if Shay's putting water and sewer in 4 years, do it in 4 years, because that's when we only tear up the street once, we manage costs. So that's how we're going to prioritize projects once we get a general feel of your support of a strategy tonight and in the coming days. So what's next? Today's the study session. We're going to sit down after this feedback with our Transportation Advisory Committee and start figuring all this out. And we're going to come back in a very public way and have another study session with council. And now I think, Mayor, you've added to the schedule based on the direction tonight. If you want to have an additional study session on 6th or not, we'll add that to the schedule. But there's a number of upcoming meetings that we hope all in the room stay engaged. And Mayor, that's my presentation.
And I'll just make a note for those online or in the audience that this session has been taped. And so there's a lot of information there. And if you want to go back and see that, that will be available on the town's website. And then for those that came in a little bit later, at the beginning of the session, council had a discussion. Really, we want to have, this is a work session. We're going to have an opportunity for council to provide feedback. We've received a lot of feedback on the Butte Bridge, and we recognize that as a issue of significant concern to the public. And so what we're going to do, and I'd say the majority of the feedback is opposed to that. So we're going to have an initial discussion on that tonight, and we could just take it off the table. If we decide that it's worth pursuing, the intent is to schedule a work session with public comment dedicated solely to that issue. So everybody will have an opportunity to sort of vet those issues. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to council. And the final thing I'll say is we will take public comment after we open the regular session. So if you're we'll be taking no action tonight, no decisions will be made, no changes will be made. This is just a work session. And if you're not satisfied with the discussion, there will be public comment at approximately 7:03, depending upon how fast we move through this. So you can tell us. So we will take public comment when we go into the regular session. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to council for questions for Troy. Who wants to start? And Beth, since you're online and sometimes it's hard, did you want to start with questions or?
I don't need to start, but thank you for recognizing that.
You don't want to put the bullseye on you?
Not yet.
Okay. Who wants to start with questions or feedback or?
I have an initial question. Why can't we stop speeders? we got a lot of input from the public asking us, stop the speeding.
It only takes one for a very scary experience. We can't get all speeders. Mike can put his full team out to enforce it. We could traffic calm every single street. You're gonna get bad decisions by motorists. What we're trying to do is minimize that. And so we can't eliminate speeding. And I don't know if Mike wants to add to that, but we know 15% of the public will speed. And getting them there could be astronomical costs. We can eliminate cars. I think that's the only way to truly eliminate the risk of a speeder.
James,
I have a quick question, and I don't think I read it, but when you say dividing town.
Mhm.
What do you mean by that?
Namely Sixth Street, or if we get a corridor that has so much volume, or we make transportation decisions that you can't comfortably and safely be the priority movement at an intersection. So at the three-way stops at Gothic and Bellevue, where there is no left-hand turn, that is the most compliant intersection for pedestrians, right? You come to the corner, they see you, you should be, if you show intent, the motorist will yield. The roundabout is the same way, right? And so we don't want the east side of town not to feel at all uncomfortable crossing Sixth to get to the west side of town or vice versa. And so that's what we mean by divide.
so one of the questions I had, Troy, and you and I went back and forth on this just a little bit prior to the meeting, but it'd be helpful, I think, for everybody to hear this discussion. In reading about roundabouts, some of the feedback is that they don't work well in asymmetric intersections.
Mhm.
So where you have a lot of volume going in one direction and a limited amount in the other. And what we're proposing to do is to use several of these, not so much Red Lady and Six, where you have problems coming out of the school, but the other intersections really to slow traffic down
Right.
rather than to manage complicated
Right.
intersection. Could you just tell us a little more about the use of roundabouts to slow traffic, but not to manage a complicated intersection?
They're unbelievably successful devices for traffic engineers. They do many, many things. First and foremost is they slow traffic down. You want that entering speed to be 10 to 15 miles an hour. You'll see on higher capacity, this on double lane roundabouts about 25, but you intentionally want them slow. 10 miles and 15 miles are incredibly safe for pedestrians. The reason you want that is, as opposed to signalizing, you don't want to stop the traffic. For air pollution reasons, many, many reasons. It creates congestion. Roundabouts allow slow procedure of cars. So the first and foremost is they slow traffic. Next is they allow any entering traffic as long as the lane, I'm sorry about to say this, as long as the lane doesn't get saturated with too many cars. So traffic engineers warn communities, you can't have imbalanced traffic flows. But there's a lot of liberties in that imbalance. Here's your little trivia to go back to talk to your engineering children. The internal lane carries 2,000 cars an hour. That's the saturated flow in a single lane roundabout. The entering traffic is 1,200 cars per hour per lane. So the way you test the imbalance is any one movement maximize the saturation, right? And so that another car can't get in, because the roundabout you yield to who's in the circle. 2,000 is the number. We've had a traffic engineer look at Pyramid and Red Lady, eventually beyond our planning horizon to get out of Pyramid, eventually you'll need a roundabout there. But even with the earlier numbers with the low exiting volume of Pyramid, he is very confident that it will work. We did not test Kebler and Treasury Hill. There's no doubt it'll work. There is not 2,000 cars an hour. There's nothing close to 2,000 cars an hour on Kebler. So the Treasury Hill traffic will be easily to get out. And so that's the biggest concern. Sorry to go detailed traffic engineering.
And maybe a follow-up question. There's a lot here. And we're not here to talk about sequencing because that's something that would come later.
Right.
But with what you're presenting, is this a 2-year plan, a 20-year plan, or a 200-year plan? Just to put us in the ballpark for.
I think Kebler's a long way away. I think with the school, there's timing of opportunity. This school traffic is not going to trigger a level service F, but within 5 years, it's going to. So I would rather tie the Red Lady to the school's expansion rather than disrupt them once they're in. Right. And so I think Red Lady's immediate. we would probably recommend you go into design with CDOT in the school next year. Pyramid is it's past the planning horizon. We'd want to use traffic numbers to drive it. So both Pyramid and Treasury are a long way, we can accelerate, but they're a long way away from need. And then the big question mark is the four-way, right? What do we do, right? If you open up Pyramid, for example, you're going to extend the life of the four-way. If you don't open up Pyramid, you're going to put more traffic into the four-way. You're going to shorten the life of the four-way. So we're going to have to do something sooner. So that's how you think of the four roundabouts. The immediate one is Red Lady.
Can I say it back to you to see if I
Yeah.
hear it? So some of these things are longer term and would be driven not because we're just gonna run out and do them tomorrow, but would happen when it's appropriate as the increase in demand. But what we're trying to do is create a framework so that over the next 20 years, as we do improvements, we can efficiently plan for those improvements. I think Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you're probably not going to get there, kind of thing. So we're not talking about necessarily implementing all of these, but rather setting a framework that would efficiently allow the community to respond as demand grows through time. Did I get it?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Okay. Other questions?
Oh, go ahead.
There were four of you that went on all of the.
Russ, what happens when you have a stop sign such as Bellevue after a roundabout and you've got back up into the roundabout?
We have the 95th queue. So there's more things when I go to the 6th Street corridor. On the wall, and we only have one, we're recommending bus lanes. So what it is not a bus lane, it's bus on shoulder. And when you get to that intersection, if anyone been into Park City? The main road into Park City allows bus on shoulder. In fact, where's the 6th Street corridor? Right here. This picture was taken by me last week in Park City. Where you're not creating necessarily a lane, the drivers at their discretion would be allowed to enter the bus shoulder to bypass congestion. So the buses will be able to bypass the congestion of Bellevue. They'll get to the intersection and then they can proceed forward. We're working with the manual and uniform traffic control devices to sign that, but we're not widening the road to accommodate, we're stabilizing the shoulder.
I think he was asking a different question. though.
But that's one, that's congestion at Bellevue, so we want to get transit. Second is the queue from Bellevue to Red Lady, right? If the queue backs up into it, the queue at Bellevue doesn't delay. If the 95th backs into it, CDOT's going to have real hesitancy to allow that to happen. But we now have alternatives to the congestion. So if we can defer the traffic from the four-way so it's not on Bellevue, or defer the traffic so it goes on Red Lady, either east or west, it manages the queue. So right now, the queue goes right to the intersection. We did a 95th percentile study, and the queue, this is the future queue. Right there where you see that letter, that's the northbound 95th percentile queue. There's room right now in the 20-year forecast that you can put the Red Lady in and keep the four-way or the three-way at Bellevue.
Right, so now we're spreading out traffic through town.
That's the
And
end.
making it easier or pushing traffic more places. I mean, I guess one of my big picture questions is when it's harder on traffic, you're more likely to walk opposed to dealing with the traffic.
Or mass
And-
transit.
Or
Or a
mass
different time, or a different time of day.
right? Exactly, but if we're spreading it out and making it easier, then that's making it so that.
I want to make it clear, 63% of all trips in the region in the whole North Valley come to CV. They either start or end in CV, so they're coming here. So they're turning at Red Lady now, or they're turning at Elk and occasionally on White Rock and the streets coming in. So their destination is Crested View.
He's asking a different.
No, the through traffic that goes to Mount Crested View is only 22% of the traffic. So what we're trying to do is get the local traffic off the regional road. So at Red Lady, so this diagram shows it with the Red Lady intersection. We know there's already, we're not going to be changing the pattern on Red Lady West. They're already using it. They're already using Fifth. What we're changing the pattern is Red Lady East, right? We're going to see increases on 7th. We're going to see increases on 8th. The traffic calming policy is The volume isn't evil. It's the speed that is evil. So can we lower it? Because these are people who have a destination in Crested Butte. And then that extends the life of Sixth. So you see Sixth is green with the Butte Avenue and the roundabout because we're now taking the local traffic off the regional road. Does that make sense?
So the got his question, right? Did that answer your question,
It's-
Chris?
Well, I mean, it's still spreading out traffic and allowing for basically it allows for more traffic for us to deal with more traffic. And so instead of.
In the neighborhood.
It allows for higher volume.
Yeah, or higher volume opposed to making it harder for traffic.
No, it's making it harder for traffic because Sixth isn't going through. So this is serving the local trips. So we have two choices, right? Just release Sixth Street. Let all the traffic go. Make it wider, make it faster, right? And then there's no trips. They're still turning on White Rock. They're still turning on Elk. They're still turning to get to this town. So they're coming here. What we're trying to do
Leasing.
What we're trying to do is extend the life of Sixth as a 2-lane street. So there's not the political pressure on you to widen it or do anything evil to that road, right? We want to keep it efficient, safe, and 2-lane. So we need our partner streets to get those destinations. If that makes sense, we are increasing trips on the local streets, but it'll be matched with a corresponding traffic calming. The alternative is to make Sixth Street faster
So
Why would you have to make Sixth Street faster?
because you need to handle the traffic. Right, you're going to widen the road. You're gonna do things at the intersections that inherently speed the traffic up. You can't slow it. What?
Can't choose not to.
Well, you're then accepting congestion and my emergency vehicles you missed the start of this, I'm sorry. So you're increasing crash risk because the most dangerous part of congestion, 40% of all crashes are associated with frustrated drivers. And so if we're sitting at the 4-way waiting for a long time, you're not going to make the best decision when it's your turn. And typically those bicyclists and pedestrians are the victims of those bad decisions. And so with congestion, you want to be intentional to make it safe. And so this was the presentation that we want to accommodate emergency vehicles. So it is a balancing act. It is how much do we release Sixth to carry more cars and not divide the town? That's exactly the tightrope that we're asking council and staff to do. How do you do that?
I'd like to go to some of the other
Yeah.
questions. So we'll go to Jason and then Anna.
You know, thinking about Chris's question, could you make the argument that making Sixth Street a little bit more efficient with the roundabout relieves pressure on the side streets? Because, you know, when things stack up, I notice, I think we all do, like,
Oh, yeah.
people, there's spillage, right? People go out over to 8th or whatever to be able to go north to south, to be able to bypass, you know, part of.
Yeah, you're seeing the spillage in our speed diagrams. That's exactly right.
And so it is a balancing act, but I could see the
Right.
benefit of having a more efficient, safer Sixth Street and reducing some of the traffic that
Yes.
wants to cut.
That's exactly right. If you do an intersection improvement like the roundabout at the 4-way, it does exactly what you talk about.
And my second question, that was my first question, is, you know, I like roundabouts. It seems like a really good solution for Sixth and Red Lady. And I'm wondering, you know, we're trying to not have a roundabout at the 4-way for however much time, you know, try to delay that. What is the argument to not put in a roundabout sooner? Because it is a hectic intersection. And I don't kind of
Change.
just change.
It's gonna be safer. It's gonna lower carbon footprint. It's gonna be more efficient, safe. I mean, there is no technical reason not to put the roundabout in. Because we can do it without impacting the community physically.
at Red Lady or?
Not the 4-way. It fits. The consequence is change. It's a big change to this community. And it's not necessarily ready for a roundabout at your main intersection. Can we trial run it, fine tune it? I mean, from a technical perspective, the roundabout solves a lot of problems at that intersection.
Sort of being a devil's advocate, because I do agree. I think we want to delay that. And you probably make the case that, you know, as we think about more infrastructure and potentially a transit center at the 4-way, or, you know, we don't know what the 4-way is going to look like in 10, 15 years. And so being able to delay that, just like we're trying to delay Elk and any major improvements until we do the water infrastructure, see the benefit of that.
And so on one diagram, we did recommend moving the RTA. If the roundabout is into the north side of the intersection, so the RTA stop is shown in this diagram right here. Here's the existing transit stop. And so we've actually worked through how transit could work. But the transit center redevelopment, and we actually create a lot of room on the tennis court side. Right, we take out no parking except the head-in parking on the liquor side or the Sherpa side to get the RTA stop. Other than that, there's no physical take.
So we're gonna go to Anna and then Malika and then Gabi.
I have so many questions. I'm gonna focus on the bus lane, questions
The bus shoulders.
on the shoulders. So we have periodically lots of parking on the shoulder on Sixth Street already. So if we made those bus lanes, nobody would ever be able to park there.
Correct.
Isn't that also one of the ways that we can create parking for events at the center that we didn't plan for parking already? And so, by then designating that as a bus lane, we're taking away what people already need, which is parking there.
Well, I'm not sure we need it, other than maybe Alpenglow, but people will walk further. The Art Center is actually coming to Beaux-Arts to expand their capacity because they now have a signed agreement with the school to use their parking. It changes the game. And so I don't think with the Center of the Arts agreement with the school, staff is probably going to be supportive of their request to expand their capacity, as long as we traffic calm west of Fifth and east of Seventh, or limit parking out there. But yes, on-street parking is great. We don't have to build a surface lot. But I think in this particular case with the agreement, they just signed it within the last 6 months. It sort of changes the game by allowing us to use the school parking lot for other things.
More questions, Anna, before I go to Malika?
No, I mean, yeah.
Okay, we'll have plenty of time. Malika?
And I think that when we talked about parking before, that the data showed us that we have plenty of parking. Right? Wasn't that our
We have just
previous?
popular spots. And I think Anna's is a popular spot, right? Parking closer to the Center of the Arts, people will want to. So if we take the closer away by saying a bus on shoulder is allowed. And then you have to manage the popularity. It's like Third and Elk is the most popular, but we have plenty of parking outside of Third and Elk. And so that's why parking management helps us push the demand.
It seems to me that all of this would be alleviated somewhat by the portion of our discussion of reducing car trips.
That's what,
So that seems like that should be the drivers.
right, and so,
See what we can do.
right, and parking management does that, but we have to sort of have a vision of what we want to do with Six. Because that we know that's going to deflect, to Chris's concern, it's going to deflect the cars. If we do something to minimize the deflection into the community and allow them to stay on Sixth, or to maximize the deflection by not doing anything, because we can't tell people where to drive unless we close streets.
And since we know that 63% of out of town trips come into town, are they not going to specific spots? Are they not going to the post office, to the?
No, they are. Right, and I think that's
Because they're not going into the neighborhoods generally.
no, they're visiting friends. Great. Or our residents are going to work. Right, they're leaving the neighborhoods to go to work. So there are trips in the neighborhood.
Thanks.
Other questions?
So many.
So,
I'll wait until the general topic comes.
okay, Gabi?
So I have a lot of little questions too, but just to piggyback on Malika's, I had a question when you were talking about the parking at the origins of the regional sort of residential areas. If we had some kind of covered bike storage that people could come into and actually have their townies and do all of their errands and things. I think that would really work. But my question is there any thought as to parking? Because again, to Malika's point, reducing the number of cars seems to me the hardest, but also the most important component of this conversation. And so is there any consideration of parking, not just for locals who are coming from their places of origin, but also for tourists?
I think we can handle that. And so the origins are the Gunnison traffic, the CB South and the Skyline traffic. If we can intercept them at their origins, those cars are never entering town. They're coming via Scott.
Right.
Right, and that is a regional conversation that we have to work with the county and RTA and the homeowners associations to get that done. The most effective way to reduce trips into town is to do that, right? And so and then manage the four-way, because they're not gonna ride the bus until they know they can't park there. And so we want them to park there, but we want them to do town things there. So we have to decide how we manage that. I don't think expanding parking in town works to reduce trips in town, period.
No, I agree. I would like to see expanded parking outside of town,
Right.
not just in consideration for locals, but also for visitors.
Right, I think another strategy is, can we create a park once environment? So how they deliver here?
Yeah.
They never leave their place of sleep. Right, so they're parking at the hotels, they're parking at the VRBO, they're parking up on the mountain, and then they're coming in by transit. So their trips to get here, from the airport or Denver or Los Angeles, wherever they are to come here, is teeny in terms of the total number of trips they make. The secret is, after they get here, how do they get here? Right, they get to the valley by car, most likely, because we have the robust system to get here. Once they're here, we capture them on the mountain. Jeremy delivers them to town. We capture the VRBOs and CB South. Scott brings them into town. Right, that's, I think, a different strategy. Because I think the number of trips that they're making, the reason for getting here is minuscule compared to why their daily trips to go to Elk Avenue or go to the resort. And I think Jeremy and Scott can deliver them once they're here.
I was just reading today in the paper about how in Aspen, you can take public transportation to and from the airport.
Scott's right here.
It's not. I think many of us would do that if we had the ability to do so.
I mean,
Why?
I'm gonna try to answer that. I think the bus staying does do that.
The bus stand does not take you to the airport.
It takes you to the Union Station in Denver, and you can get to
So it's the Gunnison-
I
the Gunnison-
know
to the Gunnison Airport, because our buses are for our workers, because we pay for them. And they're for people who are doing the trip back and forth. They're not designed to support luggage and ski racks and all
Well, why
these
not?
things.
Let's
Why do they-
not debate on the dais. I think there's lots of really good questions associated that we have to go through the RTA strategic plan. Typically, airports are huge generators in most regions. We don't have many flights, right? And I think it's a conversation with Scott and the city of Gunnison. They need to sort of figure out a local transit system. Right now, RTA delivers people from Gunnison to Crested Butte, and it does this sort of one-way loop. In Gunnison, it's not an effective local service. So I think to serve the airport and understand its demand, we really want to work with the city of Gunnison and emerge a local transportation plan. And then work with RTA, its contract with Alpine, and work through those details. That I don't think it's as easy as serves the airport. I think there's a lot of underutilized and additional route miles. We need to make sure that we serve the neighborhoods around Gunnison so we can generate ridership that the airport makes sense. It's unfortunately not the generator you think it is. In a transit perspective, it's certainly convenient, but it's not the generator. So I think to give RTA some defense is we really need to work with the city of Gunnison. How can we tie that to a better local service?
I'm not attacking the RTA.
No, I know.
I'm just suggesting that for someone who doesn't want to use their
Right.
car, there's no option other than to pay hundreds of dollars.
Right.
And Scott, did you want to add anything? And feel free to decline.
I'll decline.
That's Scott, it's what you want to ask him afterwards.
But I think just on this point, we're not saying we're gonna do this, or this for transit. We're not the deciders for that. We have certainly worked with our community, looked at what we believe most efficiently serves our community, and then worked with our transit partners to go through their strategic efforts to make the most sense given their capacity to do things. And if you want a different direction, that's how we're handling this, is making alternatives that they and we participate in their process as they do transit. An airport has come up and we are gonna push them.
Okay, Abby.
Just to piggyback on that transit conversation, and I know it's not ours to decide because we have our partners. But all of the statics of sort of better transportation in town, is there any thought to smaller, just circulators going very frequently as a suggestion?
We would certainly ask Jeremy that during his strategic plan, but there's drivers to those cars. And there's an hourly rate to those cars. So we do revenue hours of operation and revenue miles, right? The maintenance, the vehicle, how far it goes, there's a charge for every foot it travels, but there's also a charge for every hour it operates. And we're 93% of all trips in Crested Butte are on foot and bike already. Once you're in town, the trips that have an origin or destination are doing it. I'm not sure we're large enough to justify that level of investment. I think some tweaks to the fixed route and then focus on car share and bike share makes the most sense. But obviously, when Jeremy does his strategic plan, he can look through it. It's inviting to have a jitney service, and that's what it's called, right? The micro buses, and that's certainly what they're going to do on the mountain in the north part with their on demand, which is great. I'm not sure we're the same scale and the same problem. We have much more better coverage with our existing route.
Is that 93% in winter as well?
Yeah.
And would the suggestion of changing the Mountain Express service, would that jump it up?
That would increase the number of residents and employees that are accessible to the route. And so I know us healthy people in Crested Butte don't like to hear me say that 70% of the American population walks 500 feet. But think of your child, your grandmother, the not so fit. 500 foot is the metric. We're just mobile, temporarily mobile. And so we believe increasing the number of households, making the bus closer will increase ridership.
So that's going from 93%. So we're really talking about a 7.
Remember, we're not really serving town needs. We can expand it, but we want to make sure anyone who lives or works in Gunnison and lives in Crested Butte freely jumps on the bus, or vice versa to the mountain. So that 93%, we are tweaking to try to get it higher, but we're really focused on the 63% of all, and those are mostly cars delivering people here.
So I'd like to give Beth, who's online, an opportunity. Beth, do you have some questions?
Actually, no major questions. I think, Troy, you've answered a lot of my big picture questions that I had at the beginning of this. Definitely going along with what Chris, I think, asked, is us trying to balance that efficiency of moving cars versus making it, easy for people to want to drive and therefore increasing the number of trips. But I think I'm really understanding now how if we can get the people who are going into the town of Crested Butte to use those side streets to get where they're going and funneling them away from 6th Street and using 6th Street to get people to go through CB, that's starting to make a lot more sense. The only last kind of overarching question that I have that I don't think has a real answer is that I think a lot of these things look great and I'm excited to see a lot of things, but then balancing that whole smoothing of the rough edges of town kind of notion. I've been traveling a bunch this summer to some small towns, going through a lot of small towns and seeing a lot of the stuff in other places that you're suggesting. And so my question that probably doesn't have an answer is how we really balance that while still keeping the character of Crested Butte. So, but other than that, I'm pretty excited about a lot of these solutions. So
I'd love to hear kind of your take on what it means to keep the rough edges.
I think, as you said, for the roundabouts at Pyramid and Treasury, do we really need them? Do we drive that by need or drive them by want? And if we drive our community by need, we're going to extend the character of Crested Butte versus wants. And everyone wants slower traffic, everyone wants sidewalks, not everyone, but a lot of people want to completely rethought Elk. And those are character changing investments. And that's why I wanted to show on Elk Avenue, we can do a lot of the pedestrian safety improvements with paint. Paint and patios, we're getting 10, so I think, I agree with Beth. That's my biggest concern. Do we pave our gravel parking areas? Boy, that's polishing an edge, right? And that's why we're saying residential streets, pedestrians should stay in the street instead of polishing the edge and turning it into, say, Telluride that has on-street parking, a beautiful landscape, and then a sidewalk. That's Mayberry. It's not Crested Butte. So those are, I mean, we have it as the 8th success measure is polish only what you have to. And I think an example on council needs direction. Do we keep the sidewalks on Elk or not? That's polishing the edge, but there's a lot more to that because where does the ice go? Where does the water flow? Can we do a safe alternative? But that's a real big question that you are the keepers of the character. And staff certainly desires not to change the character of this town too soon. Growth changes everything. We just want to do it in our time. So we're going to be working with the community to try to figure that out.
Malika?
I saw in the packet a reflection of 2 pedestrian bridges. But you haven't
Yes.
mentioned those. Can you talk about those?
So what we would like to do, perfect timing. Extend the reach of the pedestrian. So we have a major blockade called Coal Creek. And so we want to add bridges. So I know we're threatened by the Butte Avenue Bridge. It's going to be safe. It's a narrow 10-mile-an-hour. The pedestrian is going to be as conspicuous as possible. The cars are going to yield the peds. But in exchange for that sacrifice of the community, we want more bridges. You know, Don Cook said, why don't you put a vehicle bridge over Gothic at Coal Creek rather than Butte? It's a very expensive proposition to put a vehicle bridge. We have one here already in place that's naturally traffic calmed. So these 2 bridges on Teocalli and Gothic are critical to the transportation plan. They're partners with the Butte Avenue, but even without Butte Avenue, we would like better reach, better access. So we have more pedestrian connections, safer connections for pets.
So I think what I'd like to do now is have the discussion, and I know this is going to sound a little crazy, but have the discussion about whether to have the discussion on Butte. And so I think our options are to just take it off the table based upon the feedback that we've received, or if we think it's a viable idea to explore, to schedule a work session dedicated to that topic with public. So I'd like to see kind of where council is at. Based upon feedback, do we just take it off of the table or do we explore it?
All right, I went last time, so I'll jump in. Personally, I mean, I appreciate the many respectful letters that we got from people mostly in the neighborhood. And a lot of them pointed out the one thing, which is if our compass, I don't know the word I'm looking for, is de-emphasizing cars and focusing on walking, biking, and transit, opening this bridge now doesn't make sense. I feel like it's an easy way to redistribute the traffic that is on my street. I get that. But I feel like, can't we do some of these other things first to try and to de-emphasize the cars in town? And then if that doesn't help us, we talk about it again in a little while. But I feel like right now, that's doing the opposite of what I'd like to do with town.
So Troy, do you have a thought in response to that or?
The way we have thought of, I hate cars. And people know I walk to work every single day from Mount Crested Butte and back. And so I empathize and I use the Butte Avenue Bridge on lunch with my 15-year-old dog. We can create safe streets. That being said, we also have a pilot here to work with Jeremy to do a bus only on Peanut Lake Road. Work with the county, work with Jeremy, and we do a pilot project to do transit out of that. There's 800 trips a day that goes to Peanut Lake Road. That's a big impact on this community. Right? Can we work with the county and Mountain Express to do that as a pilot instead of a really long and expensive one that we can't control the parking up in Gothic as a pilot? Can we manage the traffic or the parking on there? So we're really managing who comes in and comes out of that community with the connection. So there's no instance staff ever thought we would do it and just say, good luck. We would do it very intentionally with a comprehensive strategy. So I agree 100% with Gabi.
So what I hear Gabi saying is hold off on the idea for now.
That's what I would do.
Other thoughts. So we have one to not take it on.
I was compelled by the article sent to us by the fire department. It made sense about, you know, having access to that side of town now that they're not located in the heart of town and having, you know, a route, and the connectivity of the grid. That made sense to me. I also know that in our compass, we have, you know, being open to counterintuitive solutions, because this does feel very counterintuitive. I am not a fan of it. I don't really think that opening up streets for access to cars is how I want to go about transit in the town. I think, you know, talking about it is super important, and getting deep into these issues is going to be essential to finding the right solution. So I'd be okay with us not talking about it, but if that's the way we want to go, if we want to like kind of work through it, I think that there are some valid arguments to opening it up.
So I hear 1 5/8 not having a conversation, and 3/8 having a conversation. Does it capture that?
And I guess my question to Troy is, would we be able to open it just to emergency vehicles?
That's gonna be tough. You can put bollards at the fire district. What town do remote control bollards that when the vehicle is coming, they can lower it? Those are really hard to maintain, very expensive. I think it's not really an option in this snow environment if we open that up. And to let the vehicles go through means the boulder is moved a little bit and you're going to get incidental vehicles going through. Right now, the boulder is absolutely discouraged. So it's really hard to allow emergency, you know, if Mike on his motorcycle is one thing, but in a giant fire truck is a different issue. So we'd have to really put our head down and think it through, work with the fire district, work with Mike, if that's even possible. I have my concerns.
Malika, and then Jason.
We said that we weren't going to talk about sequencing, but of course, we want to do things in a way that makes sense and that was economically appropriate, etc. If we decided that now is not the time to address the bridge, leave the status quo, does that make sense in terms of the other actions that we feel are appropriate to take to?
I think the driver is the four-way and how we want to treat Gothic at the post office. Those are the two drivers of the Butte Avenue conversation. Both of them, the four-way has a lot of capacity left in it, so it can be delayed. The four-way, the Gothic intersection at the post office, while it's going to redistribute traffic greatly and not have them turning at the four-way, they're still going to be going to the four-way parking lot to go to the post office. So that's the driver. That's still 2 years out. And I don't think that's the driver as much as the four-way. So I do agree with Gabi that, and you, that the bridge can be delivered in the conversation.
Are you leaning towards delaying the conversation and not having the conversation now, or do you want to listen to some more?
I'd like to listen to more, but I will say that we have so many things to talk about. So many issues, the alleys, save the alleys, the dark sky lampposts on Elk. I'd like to talk about rethinking payments in lieu of parking to incentivize restaurants and other businesses in town. So, and this is just part of the list. So I wonder if it does make sense from a capacity standpoint, if nothing else, if this issue, which is a big major impact on the community, if right now we don't need it, if it's not the best use of our time and resources to address the bridge now.
Okay, Jason's next and then we'll keep going.
Beth's hands up.
Jason and then Beth.
Yeah, I agree with you, Malik. I kind of wrestled back and forth because I think it's a really well thought out plan. Thank you, Troy and the staff. I love almost all these things and I think sequenced the right way. You know, I have faith that this will really help with pedestrian safety and encouraging a bike and pedestrian lifestyle. So hats off to you. And you know, I think that, you know, we certainly got one perspective in a lot of emails and a lot of people here probably showed up are here because of that, because of the bridge and their opposition to it. And I'm not sure, you know, if we did notice it and perhaps we would get a few other perspectives, but we might not. I mean, between the survey and the emails, I do feel like it's pretty overwhelming. So we have a lot to do. So I sort of agree with you and then maybe we couch this. And I just want to say also, you know, these numbers, I live on Butte. It's where my daughter learned to ride a bike. And so I really appreciate a lot of the sentiment that I've heard. I think there will be probably a nominal sort of release of pressure on some of the other streets. And so I really appreciate that. I mean, I understand why this is being proposed. And the number of daily pedestrians and bikes are lower than I would have thought. But I wonder if instead of kind of trying to solve, you know, that pressure problem by opening it up, we could do the opposite and lean into the sort of pedestrian and bike, you know, unique place that Butte is, and create a better experience for, you know, I think Sue had mentioned she had to like direct some people. So wayfinding, like, where is this place? I think it really does a good job connecting the east to the west of town and not dividing. And so I think there could be we could see this as also an opportunity to strengthen the sort of pedestrian and bike aspect of that street. And so that's something I had thought of. But anyway, I think the question is, do we delay it? And I think we do, but I'd like to hear what other council members think.
Beth.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Malika and Gabi that it might be just worth delaying. I appreciate staff. I think this whole plan is really comprehensive. Sorry. I think the whole plan is really comprehensive and great. But given the public comment so against this one issue, I'd like to see all the rest of the things in the plan kind of implemented and to make sure that public's on board with everything we do. So I'm happy to just delay the Butte Bridge discussion and not talk about it and take it off the table so that we can really focus on the rest of this plan.
And just to be super clear, we're not talking about delaying changing the Butte Bridge. We're talking about delaying the discussion.
Correct, correct.
So
That,
we're saying that we're delaying it. It doesn't mean like, oh, we're gonna do the bridge in 3 years. It means we're gonna bring that whenever it comes back without any pre-decision about whether we're gonna do it or not. Chris?
Yeah, I'm for delaying it, because I don't see right now, you know, having more access, more areas of town for cars is gonna improve the pedestrian and biking quality of town. I mean, that's a very safe route right now to ride your bike or walk, and you know you're away from cars as a local. I mean, maybe not as a tourist. I know as a B&B owner, I can direct my guest up that way as a route to go up to Peanut Lake, riding bikes or walking, but I don't see down the road is something we'll probably have to consider, you know, and I appreciated the fire department's letter because that definitely brought up something that I wasn't initially thinking about, but don't think we're there yet.
So, and I'm gonna make a couple points. So Gabi and I are in the Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee. So we represent the town. And one of the things that the committee has talked about is supporting trailheads close to towns. We've identified the Gothic Corridor and then Peanut Lake are opportunities to really see if we can figure out how to change the way tourism impacts sort of outlying areas. And so that's, I think, reflected in the transportation plan to the extent where we can explore opportunities over at Peanut Lake with mass transit and all that. So I just wanted to mention that I think STORE is very much in support of those, sort of that direction, what we see here. And then I'm also going to sort of agree with, I think, pretty much the whole council that now is not the time to talk about opening up the Butte Bridge. I'd really like to see the town earn credibility on creating more pedestrian access. And so I do think that there are opportunities that we would see a net benefit in terms of creating Anna's very perceptive point that we often talk about counterintuitive things, that opening up that bridge to traffic, it's counterintuitive that that would actually create more of a pedestrian experience. I think that actually is a possibility, but I think the town needs to earn credibility on that before we make big moves like opening up Butte Bridge. So I'd like to, given, I don't know if we could get a count, whether it's 57 items in the plan that have been proposed or
Haven't counted yet.
haven't counted yet. But I think if we can implement some of those items and really show that we're moving in the right direction, that gives us credibility to take on some of these harder issues. So, so I think there's general consensus within council that we're not going to discuss opening the Butte Bridge. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, we will have, after we close the work session, there will be a public comment period. So if you really disagree with that, you have that opportunity to articulate that. Okay, we've got direction. You've heard what council members, how they're thinking about things. And so you will have an opportunity to provide written response. Council members, like everybody else, can change their opinions at any time, but we have direction on where we're headed on this. Are there other discussion items? Are there other items that people think should just be taken off the table, kind of like Butte Bridge, where it's just not the right time?
So if we could do it all, it'd be great.
At once.
Long time.
Oh, space it out.
Okay, Malika.
When that was in the documents, you had talked about the expansion of parklets for retail.
Possibly, yeah, it comes out, so what we're gonna recommend is this.
My question is, does retail want parklets?
I think bike retailers would.
Okay, so if they do, then I think that's.
Bike retailers would, but I think the bigger question is our 6 foot, 8 foot sidewalk that's ADA accessible. Is expanding that to 16 feet, then we can, a lot more retailers would like to have clothes racks next to their building and not out in the street. So I think the bike retailers would love to get off the brick so they're not blocking the sidewalk and use a parklet for that. But I think other retailers come with a wider sidewalk.
Answer is yes.
Gabby?
I have just a tiny little piggyback. I have a little bit of concern with talking about taking out the grass and expanding the sidewalks. And I understand the ADA component. I worry a little bit that that sounds a lot hotter to me. That grass actually helps us absorb some of the heat and isn't compounding. I just, yeah, I don't know. It's a minor point, but it just strikes me that doesn't that help us environmentally speaking, having those grass
And
patches
runoff as well.
and
right?
runoff and.
Well, I'm not sure that much. I think whatever runs off that runs off it. It doesn't absorb. It becomes hard packed. So I grew up in Florida planning wise. And they even don't give full drainage credit to grass. And they get a lot more rain, and so it runs off too, and now you're running off fertilizer and other things. So drainage is, I'm not sold on drainage. I think the counterpoint to heat is if we create a more inviting pedestrian or bicycle environment, you're getting more cars off the street. And so that's sort of the point, and is really 8 feet of grass for one block heating the earth versus pedestrian safety. So I want to just balance that.
So,
I have
Yeah,
one
yeah.
thing. We have down here at the very end of this little section, experiment with a festival street.
Yeah.
There was test a temporary weekly closing of sections of Elk Avenue. And I am really interested in doing that all across town. Is just shutting down different streets at different times to just experiment, see, how much it impacts, how upset people get, see just like kind of how it would work to just kind of narrow the scope of cars and of traffic all across town, not just on Elk Avenue.
A block party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
Traveling,
block party.
Rolling block party.
moving block.
Yeah.
Today, we're in Herald Park.
I think that would be something that would be really interesting, and it'd be a way to kind of play with some of these problems and then get feedback from the neighbors who are right there. So that's what I would like to suggest.
So we're coming up, that clock is a little fast, so it's not actually 2:47, it's like 5:47. But I would like to ask a process question, which is, does council feel like we had sufficient time to receive written comment and to vet ideas to follow Troy's schedule, where it would go off to the advisory committee? Or would you like to come back and have additional discussion before we go away? Gabby, it looks like you're leaning in.
Before we go away right now,
Well, so do you want to put up your schedule, Troy? Okay, so what they're suggesting is the next step would be drafting the plan with the advisory committee. And so the alternative is we can go straight to that, or we can schedule another work session with council to go through some of these additional ideas, solicit additional feedback in order to provide direction to the advisory committee.
I mean, I guess, but the reason I was leaning in is my initial reaction is I feel like there's still so much out there that we did an overarching day of the big things, but there were a lot of small ones. I'm just not sure that I feel. Yeah, I wouldn't mind another discussion session.
Agreed. I mean, the whole permit parking I think is gonna merit a significant discussion by itself.
And I think that the outpour of response we've had over just the Butte Bridge means all of these little tweaks will have people who want to talk about it, and providing that context and that time is super important.
And I just want to thank staff for putting together kind of the survey that primed this discussion, because it helped me. I mean, it's probably helpful for you guys to kind of hear what we're thinking and what should be off the table, but also it just got me thinking about what we're going to discuss, and I found that to be really helpful. So thank you.
I want to also thank Mark for putting it on the cover.
So I'm gonna ask Era, in terms of scheduling, whether we have time to answer
Special work session.
special work session.
I jump in.
Beth,
Sorry, because I'd be interested in sending this to the advisory committee, having them draft the plan, and then just figuring out whether they're more specific. I mean, there's a lot of specifics there, suggestions we would need to do any more individual work sessions on like specifics. So be that the parking management or something else.
so I'm gonna see if I capture this best. So one approach would be for council members to put in writing kind of their hot topics and call that out for the advisory committee, and ask the advisory committee to respond to that as part of the recommendation. Or alternatively, we could look at a special list where we discuss things before going to the advisory council. Does that sound our choice there, Beth? Did I capture that?
Yeah, and I'd be okay with having those special work sessions after it comes back from the advisory committee.
I think, Troy, instead of
We have a broad spectrum of really smart people on our advisory committee, and I believe they'll be vetting a lot of your concerns. So if the council communicated some of the bigger concerns that you clarified, I'm actually agree with that maybe you give them the homework assignment. I think it might lessen the conversation and paralyze us, right? I think if it sticks with council, we're not going to be advancing specific detailed recommendations. We're going to always stay at a higher level. And a lot of your concerns will be at the finer grain that we need to work through with the committee.
I'm comfortable with writing in my concerns.
And
I'd rather have the discussion. I think these things are affecting our whole region and
Would it not come back for a discussion?
I have a work session scheduled on October 2nd, but
That's very close though, isn't it, to the final?
adoption in November.
Well,
Yeah, but that
we don't adopt.
reschedule.
I mean, we don't adopt unless we're comfortable with it, right? And so if for some reason it goes to the advisory council and they don't do a good job and we have a work session and we say we got a ways to go, like, we don't adopt, even if that's what it says up there, right? So,
I mean,
I
I
guess
guess I have a lot of things written down that we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Just already, so that's why I feel like it'd be important to do it before we send it to the advisory.
But I would throw out, because there's several things that concern me too, but I'd throw out if we could put it in writing first and have them take their first stab at it before we have a discussion, it might shorten discussions.
I would just like to do that before October 2nd.
Oh, you are right in?
No, just to have the discussion. That feels really tight to me to coming up with a final. And I appreciate, Ian, we're not gonna approve something that we don't agree with or understand fully or whatever, but I still feel like I would like to continue this discussion and have some time in between understanding those finer details and the approval date,
and give the public
a chance to react.
yeah,
There's a lot of momentum right now.
cogitate on it.
To throw out a possible middle ground is sometime early September. I mean, to do this, write our comments to the advisory committee. Have a special meeting sometime early September-ish that they can come back with questions or comments or discussion. We can have a discussion then, because it'll have given them time to reflect on this stuff. And maybe that shortens the discussions rather than just an open discussion, because I mean, like, how many issues were we able to get to today?
We also have our regional retreat on the 22nd. That's gonna be a lot of transportation talk.
I'm concerned that, or I should say, I would just like the public to have a chance to come, listen, hear, write letters, think about it.
as a point of process, are the advisory meetings open to the public?
We can make them advertise. We want to limit comment just because of the respectful time of the committee. So the public could at least hear the deliberations would be my only sort of balance. How do we manage our advisory board's time? But absolutely, the public can come in and listen to it.
Jason?
No. I could go either way. I understand, but we could be paired. I mean, we got through very little. We got through a lot, but there's a lot to go. And, if it's kind of open-ended, it has a tendency to, we talk through it. So I'm actually pretty comfortable with what Beth said and, sending it to the advisory committee. It would be great if that was sped up somehow. I mean, we don't want to push them, but like, as soon as they are done with their draft, getting to read that, we send them comments, we read the draft right away, and then we, anticipate a public setting of, that we talk through it
Dara, what are
for a work session.
I think that also would recommend keeping, and there's been a tremendous amount of public input already in developing the job success measures, and I don't want to disregard that. So there's been a lot of opportunity for public participation, and there is some forthcoming as well. So just consider that as well.
But there hasn't been public input on the sidewalk issue, the alley issue.
They were
the-
all brought up by issues that they would like to get addressed through our workshops, because we had special mode specific workshops by Ted. And so a lot of these ideas came from the public. Now collectively, they haven't seen it all together. You're absolutely right.
And I'm just gonna say, I think we're gonna end up as a council having multiple work sessions, and the question is how we efficiently get there. I kind of like the idea of going back to the advisory council. But I'm also gonna put my flag up that when it comes back, I don't think it's gonna be like advisory council work session. Then we go into adopting. I think it's gonna be a lot more, because I think it's such a detailed plan. And there's so many things in there, it's gonna take a lot for the community to absorb, so. So even if we move forward to the advisory I'm not gonna be in favor of moving fast once it comes back to us.
That was my point. I would like to see it sooner rather than later out of that, but I totally think I'm happy with that sequence.
So I don't think it's unanimous, but I think a majority is in favor of going to the advisory council. But I do think that there's direction that if the advisory council wants to solicit feedback from us, it's gonna be a conversation. So I think that staff have heard kind of the concerns about moving too fast. So are people comfortable with that? We're gonna go to the advisory committee next, but we're gonna take the time once it comes back to us. Okay.
I
Garrett,
want to clarify one thing, on the Peanut Lake Road shuttle. Jeremy and I have spoken about it quite a bit. The pilot project would likely be the town working the pilot project. And I just want to clarify that since we have multiple board members in here and this hasn't something the board has discussed. You have not blessed a pilot project for not.
I think what we've done is bless the intent to explore it.
But it may be the town.
We're really good at not doing things, but rather exploring, talking about talking stuff. Okay,
Talk about talking.
yeah, talk about talking. So we're a little bit after 7. Troy, is there anything else you need from us before? Okay, so what I'd like to do, see what the official time is that at 7:05, let's come back and start at 7:15 by that clock or 7:10.
Troy, and
Yeah.
Thanks, Trey.
Okay. All right, thank you.